Mark Wahlberg walked onto the awkward hour set with the kind of calm confidence that comes from years of doing interviews. He'd been through all this before, the bright lights, the polite laughter, the rehearsed questions. He was there to promote his new movie, a gritty story about a former Marine who gives up violence to save lives in war-torn regions. The audience applauded as he took his seat across from Greg Gutfeld, who wore his trademark smirk, the kind that made you wonder if he knew something you didn't. "Mark Wahlberg, everybody," Greg announced, clapping slowly as if mocking a standing ovation. "The man who went from underwear model to Oscar nominee. Quite the journey, huh?" Mark smiled politely, steady as ever. "Yeah, I've been fortunate. It's been a lot of hard work, but I'm blessed." Greg leaned back in his chair, eyes sharp and calculating. "Let's talk about your new movie, another film where you play the everyman hero saving the day. Don't you ever get tired of playing the same kind of character?" The question hung heavy in the air. Mark shifted slightly, his smile fading just a bit. "I don't think I play the same character. Each role has its own challenges, different motivations, different backstories." Greg waved his hand dismissively. "Come on, tough guy with a heart of gold. That's basically your whole career, right? How many versions of Mark Wahlberg can the audience really handle before they've seen them all?" Mark's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "I pick stories that mean something to me. Stories about redemption, about second chances, about people who try to do good after they've done wrong. If that sounds repetitive to you, then maybe we just see things differently." Greg chuckled softly, glancing at the camera. "Ah, the redemption angle again. The humble hero speech. You know what's funny, Mark? You talk a lot about redemption. But weren't you the guy who assaulted people when you were younger?" The air went still. The audience froze. You could almost hear the tension crackle between them. Mark's eyes hardened. "I've talked about that many times," he said, voice firm. "I was a troubled kid who made terrible choices. I've spent my life since then trying to be better and to help others avoid those same mistakes." Greg didn't stop. "Right, but you asked for a pardon once, didn't you? Then you pulled the request back when people criticized you. Seems like you wanted forgiveness without really earning it." Mark's tone sharpened. "That's not what happened. I withdrew the request because it became a distraction from the work I was actually doing in my community. The pardon wasn't about erasing my past. It was about showing accountability." Greg leaned forward slightly, a glint of provocation in his eyes. "So, you carry your past with you, but only when it helps your movie promotions? Sounds like convenient timing to me." Mark's patience was thinning. He exhaled slowly, keeping his voice low and steady. "I talk about it because people like you bring it up. I don't hide from my past. But I also don't think I need to keep apologizing forever just because someone wants a headline." Greg smirked. "Move forward, huh? You're worth hundreds of millions. You've moved forward just fine. What about the people you hurt? Did they get to move forward that easily?" The silence in the studio deepened. The energy shifted. Mark's expression softened, but his eyes stayed locked on Greg. "I've tried to make amends. I've reached out. Some people forgave me, some didn't. I can't force anyone to accept my apology. All I can do is keep living differently." Greg nodded with mock sympathy. "That's beautiful, really. But let's switch gears. You're known for your faith. Catholic, right?" Mark nodded cautiously. "Yes, I am." "So you go to church, you pray, and you believe in heaven," Greg said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Do you think God gives celebrities a pass? Like, is there a VIP section up there for famous people who messed up but made a few good movies afterward?" Mark's grip on the armrest tightened, knuckles pale. "My faith is personal. It's between me and God. Fame doesn't buy forgiveness." Greg leaned in, relentless. "But you do think you're forgiven, right? You think all is good now because you built a burger chain and post motivational quotes online?" Mark's voice was slow and deliberate. "Faith isn't about perfection. It's about trying, every day, to do better, to become better." Greg's smile turned cruel. "That's an easy way out, isn't it? Say you're trying, and suddenly all's forgiven. Meanwhile, you're living in a mansion, driving luxury cars, talking about humility to people who'll never have what you have." Mark's composure finally cracked, his voice rising just a notch. "I've never lectured anyone. I share my story. That's it. If people take something from it, good. If they don't, that's their choice. Greg repeated mockingly. Your story. The story of a guy who got rich and now acts like he's just one of us. You wake up at 2 in the morning to work out. You've told that story 100 times. You know what most people are doing at 2 in the morning? They're asleep because they actually worked all day at real jobs. Mark stood up, his voice cold but steady. You know what, Greg? I came here to talk about a movie, about real heroes, people risking their lives for others. But you don't care about that. You just want to fight. That's your brand. Greg's smirk faltered, though he tried to hide it. Sit down. We're not done. Mark pulled off his microphone. Yeah, we are. I'm not sitting here just to be insulted. Greg raised his voice. Oh, so the tough guy walks out when things get hard? What happened to the street fighter from Boston? Mark turned back, his eyes blazing. You want to know the difference between me and you? I own my mistakes. You just hide behind sarcasm and call it truth. You mock people's faith, their work, their redemption, but you never look in the mirror. That's what makes you a coward. The audience gasped. Greg's face flushed, a mix of anger and disbelief. Excuse me? You come on my show and call me a coward? Mark's tone was calm but sharp as glass. I'm calling it like I see it. You make your living tearing people down from behind that desk. You think that makes you fearless? It doesn't. It makes you hollow. Greg stood up now, his voice raised and shaky. I've built a successful show that millions watch because I ask the questions everyone else avoids. There's a difference between asking tough questions and being cruel, Mark shot back. You crossed that line the second I sat down. This wasn't an interview. It was an ambush. Greg laughed harshly. An ambush? Please. I just asked about your public record. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't come on shows like this. Mark turned toward the exit, his voice echoing. You had a chance to talk about something real, about a film that means something, and you blew it. You'd rather humiliate people than actually listen. Greg scoffed, stepping out from behind his desk. You're an actor, Mark. You pretend for a living. Don't lecture me about meaning. Mark faced him one last time. At least I try to tell stories that bring hope. You just sell cynicism. That's your product, making people distrust everything and everyone. Is that really what you want your legacy to be? Greg sneered. Legacy? My legacy is honesty. I tell it like it is. You're just pretending to be a good guy because it sells. Mark shook his head slowly. No. The difference is, I'm trying to leave things better than I found them. What are you doing? Greg's laugh was forced now, brittle. I'm keeping people from falling for celebrity saints who think good PR equals redemption. I've never asked anyone to forget, Mark said quietly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. I've just asked for the chance to be better. If you can't see that, I feel sorry for you, Greg snapped, his composure slipping. I don't need pity from someone who hurt people and got rich from playing violent heroes. That's not redemption, that's luck. Mark looked at him for a long, silent moment. You really think people can't change? Greg crossed his arms. I think people show you who they are, and you just did. Mark nodded once, the calm returning to his voice. No, Greg. What I showed you is what happens when cruelty tries to disguise itself as honesty. Then, without another word, he walked off stage. The room fell silent. No laughter, no applause. Just a heavy electric stillness that said everything. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the cameras cut to commercial, but no one moved. The air felt thick, like everyone had just witnessed something they weren't supposed to see. Crew members exchanged uncertain glances. Even the audience, usually quick to laugh at Greg's sharp humor, stayed frozen in their seats, their expressions a mix of shock and discomfort. Greg stood there for a moment, papers clenched in his hand, trying to recover the confidence that had just slipped through his fingers. The grin that had been his trademark now looked forced, as if painted on. His mind raced. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He'd handled tough guests before, made them squirm, provoked reactions, but this time felt different. This time, he hadn't just pushed, he'd broken something. Backstage, Mark was already pulling off his jacket as he walked toward the green room, his steps heavy but controlled. His expression wasn't angry anymore. It was weary. The kind of tired that came from years of being misunderstood, from always having to defend yourself to people who didn't really care about the answer. A young production assistant, nervous and pale, rushed up to him, holding a headset that seemed suddenly too large for her. "Mr. Wahlberg," she said softly, her voice shaking, We're really sorry about what happened out there." Mark paused and turned to her, his gaze steady but kind. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You don't have anything to apologize for." She hesitated, glancing back toward the stage. He went off script," she whispered. Mark gave a small nod. "Yeah, he does that a lot, doesn't he?" Inside the studio, Greg sat back down behind his desk as the countdown to return from commercial began. His producer was whispering urgently through his earpiece, but he barely heard a word. His thoughts were too loud. He knew the clip would go viral. That was inevitable. The internet loved drama, and this was a spectacle made for headlines. Mark Wahlberg storms off live interview. Greg Gutfeld crosses the line. He could already see the thumbnails, the tweets, the debates. He told himself it didn't matter, that controversy was good for ratings, but somewhere deep down, he felt the weight of that silence from the crowd. That silence was worse than boos. It wasn't outrage, it was disappointment. When the show returned, Greg plastered on his camera smile, but the spark was gone. His voice came out steady, yet hollow. "Well, that was interesting," he said, shuffling his papers as if the movement could erase what just happened. "I guess Mark Wahlberg doesn't like tough questions. You'd think someone who's been through the streets of Boston could handle a simple conversation." His tone was meant to sound smug, but it landed flat. The audience didn't laugh. A few people forced small chuckles, but the energy was gone, completely drained. Greg continued, trying to regain control. "When we come back, we'll talk about something less intense. Maybe politics?" He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. Meanwhile, in the green room, Mark sat down on a worn leather couch, running a hand over his face. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only exhaustion behind. His publicist stood nearby, scrolling through her phone as messages and alerts began to pour in. "It's already trending," she said, glancing up. "Clips are everywhere. People are calling it the most uncomfortable interview they've ever seen." Mark gave a tired laugh. That didn't take long. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. You try to have a real conversation, and somehow it turns into a fight. Every time. A senior producer entered the room, looking uneasy. He was older, the kind of man who'd seen hundreds of shows, hundreds of blow-ups, but this one clearly unsettled him. "Mark," he said gently, "I wanted to apologize. That wasn't supposed to happen. The plan was to keep it focused on the movie. He wasn't supposed to go there." Mark looked at him, calm but direct. "You booked me on his show. You knew exactly where he'd go." The producer winced, but didn't deny it. "He's unpredictable," he said weakly. "We can't always control the direction of the conversation." Mark nodded slowly. "You could have warned me." The producer sighed. "You're right. We should have." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the monitors in the background filled the silence. On one screen, the live feed of the show continued, Greg's voice echoing faintly as he stumbled through the next segment. He looked shaken, his usual rhythm gone. Mark watched for a few seconds, then turned away. "You know," he said quietly, "I've been doing this for decades. I've had tough interviews before. But this wasn't journalism. It wasn't even curiosity. It was just cruelty dressed up as honesty." The producer looked down at the floor. "He likes to provoke reactions. That's his thing." Mark's response was calm but sharp. "No, that's not a thing. That's a habit, a bad one." Out on the studio floor, Greg was arguing with his producers during another break. "What did you expect me to do?" he snapped, his voice rising. "He brought it on himself." The segment producer, a woman who'd worked with him for years, crossed her arms. "You went too far," she said bluntly. "The comments about his faith, his past, that wasn't in the prep notes. You blindsided him." Greg rolled his eyes. "Since when do I stick to notes? This is my show." She shook her head. Yeah, and now your guest walked off live. Do you know how bad that looks? Greg hesitated for just a second, then shrugged it off. It looks like he couldn't handle tough questions. That's on him. But his voice lacked conviction. He knew the truth. The silence from that audience told him everything. As the show wrapped, Greg gave his closing remarks with his usual confidence, but even he could feel how off it sounded. The jokes didn't land, the energy was gone, and the viewers at home could sense it. When the cameras finally cut, he stayed seated, staring at his desk. Around him, the crew moved quickly, cleaning up, avoiding eye contact. Normally, he'd make a joke, throw a few sarcastic comments, maybe even tease someone about the next guest. But this time, he just sat there. For the first time in a long time, Greg Gutfeld didn't have anything clever to say. Back in the hallway, Mark was ready to leave. He thanked the few crew members who'd treated him kindly, then picked up his bag. As he walked toward the exit, his phone buzzed again. Messages from friends, colleagues, other actors. Some were supportive, some just stunned. He opened one from an old friend that simply said, "You did the right thing walking away." Mark smiled faintly. He didn't feel victorious, just peaceful. For years, he'd worked on being a better man, on proving that change was possible. He didn't need to prove it to Greg Gutfeld or anyone else tonight. The proof was in the fact that he'd walked away instead of letting anger win. Outside, the night air felt cool against his skin. The city lights shimmered in the distance as he stood by his car for a moment, breathing deeply. He thought about all the interviews he'd done, the polite ones, the scripted ones, even the awkward ones, and realized this one would probably be the most talked about of his career. But what mattered most wasn't the headlines or the chatter. It was that he had stood his ground without lowering himself. In a world where outrage was a form of entertainment, he had chosen dignity instead. And that choice, he knew, would always speak louder than any viral clip. Inside the studio, Greg finally stood up. The set was nearly empty now, the cameras powered down, the laughter gone. He looked around the quiet space and felt something unfamiliar: doubt. For the first time, he questioned whether all the sharp remarks, the honest jabs, the smug grins were really worth it. He told himself it was just part of the job, that provocation was the point. But deep down, he knew what had happened tonight wasn't clever commentary. It was cruelty, plain and simple. And he'd crossed a line he couldn't easily step back from. The internet ignited within minutes. Clips of the confrontation between Greg Gutfeld and Mark Wahlberg spread like wildfire across every major platform. Headlines appeared in real time. Mark Wahlberg walks off live show after host pushes too far, and Greg Gutfeld faces backlash for brutal interview. The footage was everywhere, slowed down, analyzed, turned into reaction videos and think pieces. Some people praised Mark for staying composed, others claimed he was too sensitive. But the majority agreed on one thing: what had happened on that stage had crossed an invisible line. It wasn't entertainment anymore. It was uncomfortable, raw, and deeply human. By midnight, news outlets were running full segments, dissecting every word, every expression, every pause. Social media burned with debate. Supporters of Mark defended him fiercely. He handled himself with class, they wrote. You could see the pain on his face, but he never lashed out. Others criticized Greg for being needlessly cruel, accusing him of exploiting someone's past just to get a reaction. Even some of Greg's regular viewers admitted that something about the exchange felt wrong. He didn't look like he was asking questions, one post said. He looked like he was trying to make the guy break. Inside his dressing room, Greg scrolled through the reactions, pretending he didn't care. But the comments kept coming, sharper by the minute. Every clip, every tweet, every trending hashtag seemed to dig deeper under his skin. For years, he'd prided himself on being untouchable. The provocateur who never flinched, the one who said what others were afraid to say. But tonight, for the first time, he saw himself through the audience's eyes, not as bold or fearless, but as someone who took pleasure in humiliation. It was a realization he didn't want, and it unsettled him more than he'd ever admit. A knock at the door broke his concentration. His senior producer entered cautiously, holding her tablet. "We're getting flooded," she said quietly. "Comments, calls, emails. The network wants a statement." Greg didn't look up. "Let them talk," he muttered. "Controversy sells." She hesitated before speaking again. "It's not selling this time, Greg. The tone online, it's different. People aren't entertained. They're disturbed." He glanced up then, eyes narrowing. "Disturbed," she nodded slowly. "They're saying it felt personal, mean-spirited." Greg leaned back, forcing a laugh that sounded empty. "It's just television. People are too sensitive these days." But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. The silence that followed his words told the truth he couldn't face. That maybe people weren't too sensitive. Maybe he had just gone too far. The producer looked at him for a long moment before setting the tablet on his desk. "You've always pushed boundaries," she said softly. "But tonight, you pushed past empathy." Then she walked out, leaving him alone with the dim glow of the screen. Meanwhile, across town, Mark sat in his car in front of his house, the quiet hum of the engine the only sound. The weight of the evening pressed on him, but not in the way he'd expected. He wasn't angry, not anymore. He was reflective. His phone buzzed again, messages pouring in from people he hadn't heard from in years. Some were fans thanking him for standing up for himself. Others were fellow actors sharing their own stories of interviews that had turned ugly. One message stood out from a young man who wrote, "Thank you for not losing your temper. You showed that walking away isn't weakness." Mark read it twice before finally turning off his phone. He sat there for a few minutes longer, staring at his own reflection in the dark window. The man looking back at him wasn't the angry kid from the streets of Boston. He wasn't even the Hollywood star who'd learned to control his image. He was someone else now, someone still imperfect, still learning, but grounded. He had spent years trying to show that change was possible, that growth wasn't just a public narrative, but a private commitment. Tonight, under the harshest spotlight, he'd lived that truth. Not by fighting back, but by refusing to be dragged down into the mud. Inside the Gutfeld studio, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The crew moved quietly, avoiding eye contact, packing up equipment with an unusual sense of discomfort. Normally, the post-show chatter was loud and upbeat, people cracking jokes, discussing upcoming guests. But tonight, no one spoke. Even the camera operators, used to the chaos, looked uneasy. Greg's name was being whispered in the corners, the tone uncertain. For the first time in years, people weren't talking about how clever he'd been. They were wondering if he'd finally crossed the line. Greg stayed in his chair long after the lights dimmed, staring at the now empty audience seats. The sound of the studio felt different when it was quiet, hollow, almost eerie. He thought about the moment when Mark stood up, the look in his eyes, the words that cut deeper than any insult. "You don't have the guts to face the things you criticize." At the time, he'd brushed it off. Now, alone, the words replayed in his mind, heavier each time. Was he really a coward? He'd always told himself he was brave for speaking freely, but what if bravery wasn't about attacking others? What if it was about empathy, something he'd long forgotten? His phone buzzed again, a message from a friend in the network. "Tough night, man. Maybe take a break from Twitter." Greg smirked faintly. It was advice he wouldn't take, but probably should have. He opened the app anyway. The top trending topic, Yars Mark Wahlberg walks out. Directly below it, Gutfeld gone too far. His stomach tightened. He scrolled through hundreds of posts, screenshots, and edited clips. One viral comment read, "He didn't ask hard questions. He just wanted to see a man crack." Another said, "Watching Greg tonight felt like watching someone bully their guest on purpose." He locked the phone and tossed it aside, rubbing his temples. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The whole point of his show was to challenge hypocrisy, not become the villain. But deep down, he knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a reflection. The performance had gone too far because it wasn't a performance anymore. Somewhere between the laughter and the provocations, he'd stopped asking questions for insight and started asking them for shock. As the hours passed, Greg stayed in the quiet studio, lights dimmed to a soft glow. He thought about his early days in television, when he'd believed in making people think, in stirring discussion, not destruction. Back then, his commentary had come from curiosity. Now, it came from anger. He wondered when that shift had happened. Maybe it was gradual. Maybe it was success. Maybe it was the pressure to always go bigger, harsher, louder. Somewhere along the way, the lines between truth and entertainment had blurred, and tonight, those blurred lines had exploded live on air. At home, Mark finally stepped inside his house. The lights were warm, the familiar hum of the refrigerator in the background, the distant sound of his kids laughing upstairs. The tension from the night began to fade. His wife met him at the door, worry written all over her face. "I saw it," she said softly. "Are you okay?" Mark smiled faintly, setting his bag down. "Yeah," he said. "I'm fine." He wasn't lying. For the first time in a long time, he actually felt free from explaining himself to people who didn't care to understand. He poured a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, the glow of his phone lighting up again beside him. He ignored it. Tonight wasn't about headlines. It was about peace. In a world obsessed with outrage, walking away was the most radical act he could make. The conversation he'd wanted to have, about redemption, about second chances, about doing good, had been lost in the noise. But that was fine. He knew who he was. He didn't need Greg Gutfeld or anyone else to define it for him. Back at the network office, the executives gathered around a long glass table, watching clips of the broadcast in silence. The mood was grim. One of them finally spoke. "We can't spin this. It's ugly." Another sighed. "He's always pushed boundaries. That's why we hired him." "Yes," the first executive replied, "but now those boundaries pushed back." There was a long pause before someone asked quietly, "Do we need to issue a statement?" The room fell silent again. No one wanted to say it, but they all knew. Damage control had already failed. The story had grown bigger than them. In the quiet hours of early morning, Greg finally left the studio. The parking lot was empty, the city beyond it washed in the pale glow of streetlights. As he walked to his car, the cold air bit at his face. For once, he didn't feel powerful. He felt exposed. Everything he'd built on confidence and control now felt fragile. He'd always told himself that his job was about honesty, holding others accountable, but tonight he realized he hadn't been holding anyone accountable but himself. Mark's words echoed again in his head, relentless and haunting. "What have you built besides a career out of being mean?" He sat in his car, staring at the steering wheel. For a long time, he didn't start the engine. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe cruelty had become his comfort zone, and maybe that was the real scandal. Not the confrontation, not the ratings, not the viral clips, but what it revealed about who he'd become.